Morning, and welcome to Implementing Effective Engineering Solutions in Unfamiliar Cultures. My name is Wayne McCulloch, and I am a former Canadian Armed Forces military engineer officer and also the former Director of Science and Technology Technical Services at Defence Research and Development Canada. A few points of my career that may be of interest to you. I started actually in 1968 as an artillery officer and transferred to the engineers in 1971. My 41-year career there had a number of highlights, but for our purposes here, airfield construction in the high Arctic in the late 1970s brought me into first contact with a radically different culture. Next up was being the operations officer for the entire UN mission in Bosnia, in Sarajevo in 1994-95. A further UN tour was with Electricity DRDC in 1996, rebuilding their national power utility. And finally, I was the divisional engineer in Multinational Division Southwest for NATO in Bosnia in 2000-2001. My job there was to actually rebuild the northwestern third of the country. And for that, I had engineers from 4 countries, one of them being Canada, the others being the United Kingdom, the Netherlands, and the Czech Republic. An interesting mix on top of the Bosnian culture itself. After a 41-year military career, I did another 10 years at Defence Research and Development Canada as their Director of Technical Services, and most of that remains classified, but there were an awful lot of very interesting projects to support both the defense science community and the Canadian Armed Forces. So a few general points on dealing with unfamiliar cultures. The first thing to do is to understand that culture, very simply, is an ingrained way of thinking and doing things. We all have our own culture. And even in Canada, there are a multitude of cultures that it helps to be able to understand and get along with. Current culture of any prospective client has been around for generations. And anything that's been around that long is very difficult to change. So from our perspective then, we are going to have to understand and deal with their culture. Understanding, of course, that we have our own culture ourselves. And very simply put, people bring us problems and we give them back solutions. Interestingly, our approach to clients from different cultures has to work for them. So we need to put them at ease. We need to develop a working relationship. And as well, our solutions have to be harmonized to work with those cultures. Or quite simply, as I've seen, they will be bypassed or ignored. So how do we do this, develop with unfamiliar cultures? Well, first thing to do is some research. You have to understand the key aspects of the culture. Now, one of these things is religion. Religion has such an effect on many cultures that you have to understand what the practices are, how devoted people are to them, because some are more devoted than others, and just try to get a sense for what they do and how they do it. This will affect their everyday thinking and actions. And you have to understand how they do things. One example, while I was in Bosnia rebuilding the country, I had to go to a monthly meeting of the people who used to fight against one another, but now were settling into an uneasy peace. How to start a meeting? Well, they started it with a very strong Bosnian coffee. They would serve it to you in a demi-tasse with a very large tumbler of juice and 2 packets of sugar, because they felt that we Westerners had a problem with the strength of their coffee. Based on my time there as the operations officer on the UN mission, I enjoyed Bosnian coffee and could drink a full tumbler of it without any sugar, without any juice, just straight up black. That helped ease the way into things. So now that you have a bit of a working relationship and you now have the problem that they give to you, you have to understand how the engineering solution will fit into how they live their lives every day. This is not always as simple as it seems, because with our own culture and where we are, we tend to think that other people are very much like us and think the same way. As many of the S4 peace stabilization force and United Nations people discovered, they don't necessarily think the same way that we do. So if you understand how those things will go in, then you need to understand that what you build for them or design for them or implement for them has to work in harmony with them. And you design your solution so that it will do that. Just an off-the-wall example, if everybody in the country was left-handed and the predominant use in Canada is right-handed, we'd have a bias towards a right-handed solution. But a right-handed solution won't work in a left-handed society. So we need to actually sit down and develop something that's going to work for them. And lastly, the one thing that should overarch everything that you do is care, compassion, and respect. Care for the people for whom you are doing engineering work, compassion for the situations in which they find themselves and have come to you for a solution, and respect for them because they have been living there and surviving for a very long time. Now for the real fun part, examples in the real world. The first one was interacting with the Inuit in the 1970s in the high Arctic. The culture of the high Arctic has been designed over centuries to exist in a time when things are very, very harsh, and any kind of discord will mean that people get hurt feelings, they stop talking to one another, and when that happens, the small grouping of 3 to 5 families will all perish in the Arctic. Because if you stop working together, you cannot survive in that area. As a result of that, their culture is such that anything that introduces stress is to be avoided at all costs. They will agree with anything. They will never say no. And this is a bit of a problem for us. They also don't like direct questioning. And building the airfield for the community in the high Arctic, we had a bunch of old rusting oil barrels littering our construction site. And I wanted one of the local fellas who had a truck to remove the barrels. Well, in the Arctic, if it's a good fishing day, folks are out fishing because they can eat fish and they can't eat money. So oftentimes they'll say, yeah, I'll be over there tomorrow to do something. Turns out to be a good fishing day and they're gone. Now, how do you ask someone when they're going to do it again without bothering them. The solution in the Arctic is that you take a very indirect approach. I had to ask this fellow how his truck was working. And he very quickly made the link and responded, oh yeah, and I'll be around to deal with those barrels the first sunny day when the fishing's no good. Well, that worked quite well. During the Bosnian Civil War, my job as operations officer was to effectively control all of our peacekeeping operations. This involved 25,010 military people from 32 countries. Each country has its own culture. And in that kind of interaction where we had Ukrainians who were still dealing with the aftermath of the end of the Cold War, we had 3 different groups in Bosnia who were hell-bent on killing each other. And we had a political organization, United Nations New York, which had its own unique culture in terms of dealing with things. So, for example, with the UN, getting a decision was a lengthy and complex thing, and you had to develop your work plan to accommodate that. Dealing with 3 warring factions meant that we had to essentially go and discuss 3 times the same solution using a different approach because each faction had its own culture and needed to be approached their own way. And then the problem of dealing with 32 countries of contributing soldiers to the peacekeeping mission. It was quite interesting. And on top of that, you had a number of things. Now, I'm not sure if you can pick it out in the photo, but if you watch this road snake around the curves, you will notice that the rock cut that they made is in half the shape of a tunnel. This meant that driving down this road, if you were driving a cargo truck, you had to be in the wrong lane going around that corner. Hair-raising thing at times, but also something that you needed to take into account if you were going to do a road design. Obviously, not much in the way of infrastructure that would actually take care of the mountain that they half tunneled through. In Haiti, the folks in Haiti are surviving in a very, very hot climate. The coldest night of the year happened only once during my tour there in January, and the temperature one night went all the way down to plus 24 degrees. Normally, it was 10 degrees higher than that in the middle of the night and 10 degrees beyond that during the day, feeling much hotter in the sunshine. So Haitians, to survive in that, don't move at the same pace that Canadians do. Canadians just can't exist in that kind of heat. And I've seen people work from sunup to sundown, swinging a sledgehammer, breaking concrete. They don't do it very fast, but they only stop for a water break every 2 hours and 30 minutes for lunch. They work straight through the rest of the day at physical labor. Really interesting. So you have to understand that folks there aren't going to get a move on when you want them to. They know better dealing with their climate, and their culture is all about patience. They're also a country with a lot of people and very little in the way of Canadian style infrastructure. The power plants in Haiti were generally large marine diesels. And when I arrived in January 1996, the elite of Haiti was upset that the dictator had fled the country and was leaving the country with no effective government, because when he left, most of the bureaucrats and the political infrastructure of the country left with him. The elite that remained decided that they were going to provide power to the people at 4 times what the government rate was. So there was a lot of push on to protect and rebuild the power plants. Now, the American style of protecting these was to literally build concrete walls 15 feet high, top it with razor wire, and put machine gun towers in the corners. This did not endear the power plants to the local community, most of which was the surrounding slums. And so as a result, there were frequent ambush attacks on supplies going to the facilities, and actual attempts to break into them and cause even more severe damage. My solution was that I hired the leaders of the street gangs as security guards. I paid them very well, but I told them that if there were any problems, they'd be fired. Well, in Haitian culture, they were now respected members of the social infrastructure, and they were paid well, so they had enough money for the people that they worked with to spread the money around and create a better standard of living. As a result, the gates to the power plants stood open, and people would just drop by to find out how repairs were going. A much better solution. Haiti is also a country of manual labor jobs, and it needs to be, because they have 2 million people in the capital city, and everybody needs a job just to stay alive. There are no government support programs to speak of. The American solution was to bring in the automation and mechanization. So they would bring in bulldozers and front-end loaders and, automated meters. And that wouldn't work, because in Haiti, it's better to have 1 million shovels, 1 million wheelbarrows, and 1 million pickaxes and create 3 million jobs, and have one person on a bulldozer, another in a dump truck, and another in a front-end loader. Instead of 3 jobs, you got 3 million. Much better for the economy and much better for the society. On the automation side of things, Haiti's power was charged because we had people who literally walked around and read all the meters. In Haiti, in the cities, the slums are located in the center of a block, and there is an icing of stores around there. Inside that is a slum where there's generally 140-watt light bulb per shack. What we discovered was that of the 11,000 connections that we counted going into the slum, there were only 3,000 accounts being paid. The rest, the meters had either been stolen, bypassed, or broken. So the solution was to get a hold of the slumlord, again, give him an identification card for the company and say, listen, my meter reader guy is going to come and read your meter, and you get to collect from everybody else as an EDH employee, and you pay the company. Well, that worked out really well. The meter reader, instead of being killed on site, actually was welcomed in, because without the meter reader, the slumlord did not have a respectable job. It all worked out very, very well. Dealing with multinational repair teams. The folks doing the repairs on the plants were from 4 different countries: Switzerland, France, the Netherlands, and the United States. And that made life very interesting. I managed to engage some assistance from Hydro-Quebec, and we started to get a bit more talking going back and forth. Initially, there were a number of tensions because one country had different practices from another country. And the solution to that was to sit down with them and say, okay, tell me what your solution is. Now tell me why it's your solution. And have other people listen to it from other countries and provide perhaps some suggestions. So we ended up with a 6-country solution: France, Netherlands, Switzerland, Haiti, Canada, and and the US. So we ended up with really a better understanding between people and more help making things work in Haiti. I've touched on the modern practices conundrum, but I do have one further example to add, and that is the Americans, when they were running the mission, had looked at the 3,000 employees in EDH, and they said, you should have no more than 800 employees, because that's an efficient company. Well, yeah, but now you've got the remainder of the folks unemployed. A problem. No, we didn't want to hire everybody, including Fred's Uncle Jack, who just, sits on the corner and reads a newspaper. But a more reasonable figure for the folks was somewhere around 1,500. And they were willing to work to that with me, whereas my predecessor, who had been an American, they gave a terrible problem to all the time, because he just kept saying, you're doing it wrong. Do it my way. Remember that care, compassion, and respect? He was really missing on all of those. In Bosnia, I've mentioned drinking the coffee, but the other thing that was really handy was I learned to speak a fair bit of Serbo-Croat. And that was very, very helpful, because if you are going to do that to adapt yourself to their customs and their language, they will be left with the sense that you are also there to get them a solution which is going to work for them. Now, when I was there as the divisional engineer, one of the areas that I was responsible for was the telecommunications system in the entire northwestern third of the country, as well as rebuilding the hard infrastructure of roads and bridges and power plants and the rest of it. So we had a secure system. Being NATO, we would have classified information that we wanted to protect. The United Nations does not deal in classified information. Everything they do has to be transparent. That's how they work. NATO, a little different. We had a problem. We were upgrading the telecommunication system, and there were some supply chain issues. The supply chain issues were with country A, and the installation team was from country B. Well, you can imagine that things not going smoothly, national frictions started to occur. And it was my job as a neutral third party and their boss to try to sort that out. So talked to the fellow with the supply chain issues, and I said, okay, listen, stop trying to be optimistic. Give me something that you are familiar with your industry is more realistic. For the other side of the fence, I said, you've been involved in these kinds of projects before. You must understand that sometimes when you're delivering new technology, it doesn't roll out the way you expect. And so building that bridge, that worked out a little better. But I was still left with the fact that part of the secure network would not be ready by the time we had a particular operational task. And as a result, we had to adopt a novel security posture. And I took this to my commander, explained the pros and cons, and how I had a non-official but still effective engineering solution to that. Now, I was talking to an infantry officer, so he did not have much in the way of a technical background. Once again, important to understand his culture, being from yet another country, and being able to explain it to him in a way that he would understand. So to sum up then, the whole idea of doing engineering is to deliver effective solutions to our clients. Delivering those solutions is oftentimes based on our understanding of the people and how they will use those solutions. And to understand the people and how they will use the solutions, you need to ground yourself with their culture. I hope I've given you something that's been useful to go with. And if you have any questions or if you're curious about more information or anything, my email is on this last slide, and you can send me an email. I'd be happy to receive them and respond to any queries that you may have. Thank you very, very much for listening to me, and I hope you have a wonderful career in engineering, as I did for my 50 years. Thank you.